Thank you, Amber. It's great to be here. And what an amazing lineup we've had so far.
I
I'm
know.
super excited to get going with the second act because it is just going to wow you as much as the first group. So I'd like to ask our audience, what is something that maybe you take for granted or assume to be true, but may not be? Whether it's conflict or parenting or biases, it's time to change the narrative of what we've been taught, as these three speakers in our second theme have done. First, we have LeeAnn Moss. She's an executive coach, speaker, and founder of TWC Training, a coaching and training company that provides individual and group services to mission-driven leaders to take the next step and make a stronger impact on the communities. Her topic focuses on the power of conflict. So first, let's bring LeeAnn Moss to the stage. Welcome, LeeAnn.
Thank you, Angela. I'm thrilled to be here.
Take it away.
The chimes on my phone kept going off. You and your family are in my thoughts and prayers. I'm sorry this country sucks. I hope this pain leads us to a better love of others. My family and I are trying to do better. These were just a few of the sentiments I received via text from friends and former colleagues in late May 2020. Their words were kind, and you would have thought that upon seeing them and reading them, I would have felt loved and supported. But the truth was, I was livid. I was livid because it took the public murder of a Black man for them to acknowledge for the very first time that we lived in two separate worlds. I was livid because I worried that these kind sentiments might only be for me and not for the Black stranger that they would see walking down the street. I was livid because after all of this time and all of the progress that this country has seen, the same issues persisted, and they too often persisted at the expense of Black men and women. As Angela said, my name is LeeAnn Moss, and I am the proud daughter of Pauline and the proud granddaughter of Elizabeth, two incredible women who never once shied away from an opportunity to speak their minds about the things that matter to them. I'm also a recovering people pleaser. I mean, really, for a long time, I was inclined to weasel my way out of uncomfortable situations by lightening the temperature, making a joke, making other people feel comfortable. But honestly, there was something super different about last May. As a country, we were in lockdown when news of Ahmaud Arbery being shot and killed while jogging took over our news feeds. We were all trapped in our own homes as news of 3 officers forcing their way into the wrong apartment, firing enough bullets to kill Breonna Taylor, showed up in our stories. And we were all rightfully horrified, saddened, and outraged when we saw footage of George Floyd being knelt on by an officer for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The global reaction to these events made it seem like people were paying attention for the very first time. As my phone lit up with messages, people checking in on me, affirming me, I felt my shoulders tense up and a tightness in my chest. To me, the messages felt more like the kind of words you offer someone when a loved one passes away. You know you can't change anything, but you want to offer something. I knew it was well-intentioned, and I had the utmost respect for the people on the other side of the phone. But reading those messages had my blood boiling in a way that I knew was going to be hard to explain. I went to bed that night hoping I could sleep it away. But as I tossed and turned, I knew that I had a choice. I could either stay silent and appease them by just being grateful that they even cared enough to reach out, or I could speak my truth and candidly share my experience of what it meant to me to be a Black woman in America. And that might cause some conflict. When you think of conflict, you might flinch a little bit. I certainly do. No one that I know actually enjoys real life, raw conflict. As a society, we've largely been conditioned to avoid conflict at all costs. This holds especially true for women. We've been taught that certain topics should be off limits so we don't ruffle any feathers. We've been taught that conflict is too polarizing, more about winning versus losing, right versus wrong. And when it comes to big topics, money, politics, race, we've been conditioned to just avoid the perceived conflict and stay silent altogether. For a long time, I also internalized that message, sacrificing my own feelings for the sake of keeping the peace. And then I read a book, Braving the Wilderness by Brené Brown. In the book, Brené writes, people often silence themselves for the sake of protecting relationships, maintaining connections. But when we avoid certain conversations, we sometimes make assumptions that perpetuate or deepen misunderstandings, and that can cause resentment. Does that sound familiar? So what can we, as leaders and as individuals committed to building a more equitable future for everyone, do? What price are we willing to pay to avoid conflict? When I work with women who are ready to be seen and heard as leaders in the workplace, we very intentionally work through what it means to use our voices and to be assertive. For many of us, this practice isn't challenging in that we don't know what to say. It's that when we do say these things, we sometimes worry that we run the risk of ruining a relationship and not being able to repair it. Or maybe we are seen as ungrateful, mean, or bitchy even. For Black women and other women of color, the stereotypes can be even more harmful. Tropes of angry Black women and fiery Latina are all too often cast upon opinionated women who dare to speak up. And there's a very real concern that the price we pay will be too significant for us to overcome. But more often than not, the people with the most to lose are the most willing to engage in conflict because our lives and our livelihoods depend on it. So how can we overcome our aversion to conflict? How do we change the narrative about conflict? And how can we use it as a tool to create better opportunities for everyone? There are a few things I keep in mind when approaching conflict. The first thing is that we have to see conflict as an opportunity for individual and collective growth. The more we become comfortable speaking our truth and using our voices to ask for what we need, the more we provide other people with a model for how to do the exact same thing. Second, we have to weigh the risk of staying silent. My time-tested trick for putting these things into perspective is to really say not what I might be regret saying, but what I might regret not saying instead. And third, we have to be willing to accept that the people on the other side of this conflict might not be ready to hear it. And while that can be difficult for us, perhaps as people pleasers, to accept, especially as we navigate the harmful stereotypes that others might assign to us, we don't need to dilute our message solely to accommodate someone else's need to be comfortable. At its best, conflict is uncomfortable to navigate, but more often than not, the risk is worth the reward. There's growth that comes with putting yourself in a moment of discomfort and being open to listening to another perspective. And in exchange for that uncomfortable moment, we can begin to normalize the experience of speaking our own truth and also being vulnerable enough to listen to someone else's. These were all of the things that were rolling around in my head as I woke up the next morning. And to be perfectly honest, I still had no idea how I would address this situation. I thought about all of the years of difficult conversations I've had at work, with family. I thought about my grandmother and my mother and what they might do in my situation. I thought about the people who had reached out, the connections that I had with them, and how simple it would be to simply stay silent and just be grateful. But deep down, I knew that that wouldn't be acceptable. I owed it to them and to myself to be honest. Here's what I said. Thank you for sending this. I really appreciate your words, but that's the bare minimum. No one is exempt from fighting this fight. I'm sick of kind words. I need people who are willing to have uncomfortable conversations and risk being disliked because they're calling out white supremacy, white privilege, and white fragility when they see it, and even when they benefit from it. I say this with all the love in my heart. I need people to stop trying and to start doing. The words felt hot to my hands even as I put down the phone. I had no idea what those words would unleash on the other side. But I knew that even if they weren't well received, I wasn't willing to pay the price of another Black life simply to appease my own comfort or theirs. It's worth repeating. The people with the most to lose are often the ones who are most likely to engage in conflict. But the burden shouldn't solely be on people of color to have this conversation. It will take all of our voices to have these conversations, even if our voices are trembling as we speak. So, as we continue on in this movement to truly challenge the status quo, what role will you play? Will you be the polite bystander, simply staying silent for comfort's sake? Or will you use your voice, daring to speak up and speak out to create a more equitable future for all of us? Thank you.
LeeAnn, I cannot begin to say how proud I am of you as your speaking coach. I felt your words in a very different way today. I want to read some of the comments that were shared while you were speaking. I'm almost breathless. Chat, you've already captured my undivided attention, says Nicole. Silence protects the violence. This is a whole therapy session. Powerful. What might I regret not saying? I'd love to change the narrative inside so I can change the narrative outside. What are your thoughts about some of those words?
All of the above. This took, as Angela knows, a long time to fully process. And I can, as I'm sharing these stories, there's a lot of stuff that comes up for me as well. And I think that far too often, myself included, we're so much more comfortable, right? Choosing the easy option of staying silent because it's not worth the hassle. But this is worth the hassle. These things are not easy. They're very hard, but we can do hard things. And we have to do hard things. It's not just about what you see on the news. It's about each and every one of our lives interpersonally. So I just hope that kind of sets the stage for the conversations and the narratives that we need to have within ourselves and with each other.
Well, I have to leave you with this comment. Wow, you are powerful, fierce, and need to speak that again. And I couldn't agree more. And if you'd like to speak with LeeAnn, after our third speaker, we'll be having breakout sessions. And LeeAnn, again, you rocked it, girl. Great job.
Thank you.